All right, so we are back today. We're going to be talking. Today's going to be a lot shorter of a podcast. We're going to talk about scopes and the differences in some of the scopes that you may see in different shooting sports or in the tactical games. So, Jared, will you tell us some of the differences between like what an LPVO is, and I guess the new ones are. I guess the new midline is called a MPVO, mid Power Variable Optic. Is that right?
I think that's what the guys on social media are calling it these days.
That's what the cool kids are saying.
We'll go that way.
Okay. So what's the difference between one of like an LPVO that you would see at a tactical games event, like a 1-6 or 1-8, versus something that's a 4-16 or a little bigger?
Before we get into it, like the format of these are probably going to be like we're going to start a timer about 12 minutes, and we're going to try and get this done in 12 minutes.
Okay.
All right. And then,
12 minutes.
So kind of after we get it started, start the timer, we got 12 minutes to talk about it.
Okay.
So that way we can pack all the information in.
All right. So we know the topic, scopes, and differences.
Scopes, differences. We're down Janae. She's busy winning all 7 events this weekend. So she'll be back in a couple days. We'll do a
recap with her
of everything she went through, passing out, whatever happened.
Stroking out or whatever.
Yeah. So, all right. But yeah, so we'll start. 12 minutes on it, and LPVO versus MPVO.
MPVR, I guess that used to be called HPVOs, high power variable optics. But if we're talking about a mid-range 4-16 or 2.5 to 10, somewhere around there.
Yeah. Okay. For the tactical games, I've stayed away from it. Mainly where I place priority on things, and then also kind of the way I shoot is a little different. A lot of times, what you'll see is a new person comes in. Once they get past that initial hurdle of finding you see them like they get their cheek weld, they get all ready to go, and then they look through the scope, and then they spend a lot of time doing this thing trying to find the target in their scope. Once they get past that, they get hooked on max magnification.
Mm-hmm.
I need to see everything.
Mm-hmm.
I need to see the fly on the target. I need to see that. And you really get really focused in on your heart. You can see your heartbeat in the scope.
Mm-hmm.
You can see every shake in the scope. You can see a ton of stuff. And instead of pulling the trigger, you start getting a little bit of trigger anxiety because you're watching
everything that's going on. Yeah.
Because as you magnify, it magnifies the amount that you're shaking, the amount that you're doing everything. You see all of that.
Sure.
There's some people that doesn't really bother. For me, I don't want to see it. For me, I trust my scope. I trust my setup. I trust my zero, and I trust my holds. And I want to be focused on making a really good trigger pull.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be focused on seeing all the micro shakes that are in my scope, which are 100% inevitable when your heart rate is sitting, 160.
Yeah.
So like you got done working, you pulled out your gun, you loaded your magazine, you get down, you might be down by the time you pull the trigger, like 140, 145,
sure,
somewhere in there, but you are not steady.
No.
So you're going to see all that in the reticle, and I've just never been a fan of that. So I think kind of the progression goes, you start, you can't find targets, so you're on like the least amount of magnification.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of a sudden you get to where you can find targets, and how you can find targets and not get stuck behind the scope, all that. And then you go through a phase where you're like, I'm going to be at max magnification so I can see everything. And then a couple of years later, as you get really good at, you're not really, but you get proficient at shooting and confident in what your bullet is doing and stuff, you'll find yourself dialing that magnification back to get more perspective,
mm-hmm.
and to take out that wobble. And so you can focus on pulling the trigger instead of focusing on the target.
Sure.
Which, for pistol shooting, there's target focus versus front sight focus versus, and I'm not going to get into that. But rifle shooting, it's almost the same thing. where you're more focused on the details of the target than you are, and you just forget, hey, I got to pull the trigger too.
Right.
And focusing on really good trigger pulls is the name of the game when you're trying to hit a small target.
Okay.
That's the general overview of it.
Oh, the overview of those two?
Yeah.
So per scope, I mean, obviously like one has more power than the other, but some of the differences in the scopes, down here I have parallax. So what is the difference between like a 1 to 8 parallax versus something that is a 4 to 16?
So LPVOs, and there might be some, I'm talking in general terms because I'm sure I'll get torn apart for it. But the LPVOs, meaning 1 to 8s, 1 to 10s, they have a fixed parallax. So there's not a parallax adjustment. Whereas the and medium power variable, that's awkward to say.
That is awkward.
That you're going to get into where you have parallax adjustments.
Okay.
To where you can adjust the parallax, and the benefit of that is as the magnification increases and the distance increases, if you put your gun in a vise and you do not have the parallax adjusted correctly. So if you put the gun in a vise directly on the middle of the target and you're not touching the gun, and you put your head in the eye box, like the area that you can see through the scope without turning black, right? And you go to the left side of that eye box and to the right side of the eye box, you'll actually notice that the reticle will move off of the target if it's small enough target.
Sure.
And I don't know the exact sizes or distance, maybe 500-600 yards. And if you move to the left side or to the right side or up and down, you'll see your, if you're using a BDC reticle, you'll see that 500-yard line at 500. If you move your head up and down, you'll see that kind of move on the target.
Got it.
Up and down. And then if you move left and right, you'll see the reticle start moving a little bit.
Got it.
Then if you go and adjust your parallax to where it is at 500, your parallax is at 500 and everything's good, and you start moving your head around, you might notice a tiny little bit of movement, but it's not going to be near as drastic as if your parallax is not adjusted correctly.
And that's more or less like the camera lens focusing at a specific distance.
Yeah, I mean, what a lot of people think of parallax is they think of it as a focus, right? But really what you're doing is, and it's like, we're going to keep it at like the
elementary level,
high school level.
Okay.
Right. Because there's a whole another thing on parallax that we're not going to talk about, because it's, you can listen to like a PRS about it. But but you can think of it as a focus knob at the elementary level, and you're always going to be fine. Like if you use your parallax adjustment to where your target is in focus, your parallax is going to be good. And then the other thing that you can say, so that a lot of the parallax adjustments will have yardage markers on it. So you'll look at it and it'll be like 500 yards. I would more so say that's a very good adjustment to go to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's 500 yards.
Right.
So there's a lot of other things that can affect exactly what that parallax is, and then the quality of scope too.
Sure.
So, there's some scopes that says it's on 10 power, but it's not really 10 power. It may be something else.
Okay.
And then your parallax says it may be adjusted at 500, but then there's also like your diopter, how far you are. All this other stuff goes into play on your parallax, but it's a good rule of thumb. And for 99% of people, if you just dial to that yardage marker, you're going to be good. Or if you just stick your head in the scope and focus it, you're going to be good.
Sure.
But it is an advantage
to have an adjustment.
On a small target at 600 yards. Yeah, depending on the size. Size and distance is relevant there.
Yeah, we got less than 5 minutes. We got to book through this. You want to talk about difference in turrets or light transmission first?
We can do light transmission. It's quick.
Okay.
So you're bringing in a medium power variable optic. Since you're operating in, let's say you're at 10 to 12 power on a scope that can go up to 16 or 20. you're not maxed out on that magnification.
Sure.
So your light transmission is going to be a lot better.
Okay.
And you're going to get a wider field of view
Right.
at that magnification.
Right.
More than likely. I'm sure there's some scopes out there that are different. But general rule of thumb, that's what you're looking at. So you're not maxed out, and the field of view is better at the same. Whereas a LPVO, you're maxing out everything.
Right.
So if it's towards the end of the day, or it's cloudy and dim and stuff already, you're not going to be getting near as much light transmission.
Right. Much light in the scope.
Yeah.
Does sun glare, is that affected by the size of your optic at all? Like, does a bigger optic have better protection from sun glare?
Nah.
Either one doesn't matter.
It can affect both. Yeah.
Okay. Difference in turrets. I know like a medium power has a turret designed to be able to dial as you get further out in distance. And LPVOs do not. So what's the advantage of having that?
Definitely when they're designing it. I mean, most LPVOs are designed to be zeroed.
Okay.
So like the turret is designed to zero.
Sure.
Like actually like zeroing your gun.
Uh-huh.
They expect on LPVO that you're going to use the reticle and not dial for it, right? So that's why they're not putting much stock in it. Most of the time they're capped turrets. They're not exposed turrets.
Sure.
They're locking turrets. They just have a cap over the top of them.
Right.
Like at the sniper challenge, Justin went in the tower. Justin went to go adjust his scope to, he was going to dial since it was one target bank at a certain distance. He was going to dial for it. And it was dark in the room. And when he went to go do it, his thumb hit it and it zipped across. And he didn't know how much it zipped. So he counted, I think, like 5 more clicks over. And it ended up he dialed way too much, right? Then he had to take off his glasses and like stand really close to it and like walk around the front of the gun and like stare at it, trying to find where the zero was.
Sure.
Back. Whereas if he was medium power Variable Optic or just a bigger scope, he would have much bigger numbers with contrast because it's designed to be dialing.
Sure.
And probably exposed turret or locking turret, one
Okay.
or the other, or a zero stop, right?
Right.
He's in that situation. He just zips back to zero stop. My zero stop is stopped at -1 mil, right? So like you would zip back to -1 mil, count 10 clicks over. Now I'm back at zero. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
Whereas LPVO typically doesn't have zero stops and all that.
Got it. So you could go the opposite direction and
Right.
really mess yourself up there.
Right.
I guess last question about this, and we got a minute left. Weight difference between one and the other, if you're talking about for tactical games purposes. I know they had to run with their rifles this weekend in North Carolina. So like weight of those two, is it a big difference or?
I mean, you've got some LPVOs that are tanks.
Sure.
That are heavy, and then you have some medium power Variable Optics, and like the NX8 line that Knife Force has is light.
Okay.
So if you get like one of those LPVOs that's built like a tank and weigh it against the NX8, the NX8 might even be lighter.
Sure.
Right. General speaking, an LPVO is going to be lighter.
Right.
But yeah, the scope's going to be a little bit heavy and a little bit more unwieldy, just bigger, longer. So.
All right. Last 30 seconds. Which one would you choose and why?
I'm still LPVO. It's lighter. It's more nimble and also where the weight is distributed on the gun. If you have a lot of weight on top of your barrel, right? Whenever you get into position, that's weight that is not under that's keeping you stable. It's on top that you're having to stabilize.
Got it.
Right. Doesn't sound like it makes a lot of difference, but it kind of does. God, that's loud. We'll go a little over. So doesn't sound like it makes a lot of difference, but it did, or it does. And then the action shooting stages, I don't want to shoot an action shooting stage with a 4 to whatever, and I do not want a red dot on my gun. I shot open in 3-gun for a long time.
Yeah.
And a 45-degree dot is allowed. Yeah, I mean, you could have 2 dots if you wanted.
Sure.
Whatever you wanted. And the only time I ever used that is if there was close-up paper.
Okay.
I would go ahead and throw my LPVO all the way to max magnification. Because if you're using a second focal plane scope, which is what I used to use, and you're at 5.5, not 6, those subtensions aren't what you think they are, right? So I would go ahead and push it all the way over to 6 power, and then I would shoot the up close targets with the red dot, and then lay down and shoot long range. That's the only time I use my red dot. And most of the time, I'd still just look over the scope or look through the scope and shoot the paper.
Sure.
So, however, if there's situations where you have to run, there's an awkward shooting position.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can get hung up on that 45.
Right.
And it's another 0 you have to worry about. That thing's always getting beat up. Right.
Mm-hmm. It's like totally exposed on the side of the gun there.
You're throwing it back behind you and the gun is just slamming on that red dot. And then you're putting the gun down, kind of tossing the gun down, bam, red dot.
Yep.
So I can only imagine those things are getting beat up pretty good and quite possibly losing zeros.
Sure.
It's just another thing I don't want to take care of.
Right. Well, I didn't even think about constantly losing 0 or being on 0. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. So a lot of people, it's 2 different zeros, 2
Sure.
different things you got to 0. Before a match, you got to go check that that's still 0. Like a mismark, all that. I don't want to do it.
Too much.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's scopes. Stay tuned for the next thing.
Alrighty.
Later.